Alrighty, so let's learn and code some forms because of all the things we do on the web, the most common thing the user does is they fill out a form of some type. I mean, literally, almost everywhere. All the things that when you put something in to a web page, that's most likely using a form. 99.9%. Okay, so what I've done here is I've given you a couple links. One to the guide that I think is really helpful. Honestly, just reading through this, your first form, how is it structured. Again, you don't have to know all this, but having some exposure to it. Validation, like we'll get to that. We might be, actually that might be our discussion this week, I think. Going back here. Sorry, I get sidetracked, right? So most likely we'll be using the input. But I actually did a little research as I was starting into this because one of the things I like to do is use ChatGPT for like what are some of the best practices. And so what I thought I'd do this time, in addition to just telling you the results, I thought I'd give you my prompts, right? You know, when coding forms in HTML, what's the best way to have each input be on a new line? Let me show you why I asked that question as a form to introduce what we're doing. So for this work, I have week 6 set up like I showed you in the attendance. I did a little CSS, right? And I have my code. I did do some minor changes, so make sure you get those, right, before starting into this. Mostly moving this out, right? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to, and I want you to understand this context. We're going to hard code. I've mentioned this before, but we're going to hard code the form into the HTML. We could write code to create the form, and we're going to write code to output some of the data that we get and the array of objects. But for this point, I just want to, because it's such a new concept for most people, is just show you how to create a form in HTML. So I'm going to move over to my editor. Okay, here I have my style that I did. I'm going to roll that up so I don't have to look at it. And right after the body, I'm going to do form. Okay, now by default, form is going to add an action. And that action I'm going to get rid of. Now, why am I going to get rid of it and what is it for? Like if forms were, when you submit them, hitting some kind of server-side backend, then we would need to reference that script here. But because we're handling all this on the client side meaning the browser side locally, or when somebody's doing the work, that JavaScript is loaded locally. That's what client side is, right? All we need is this. I do want to put an ID that also calls it a form, okay? So that's to start with. That's just the tag to do it. And now, you know, and this is what I was asking chat about, right? When I was asking chat, what's the best way to do it? And chat gave me like many different ways to put in, sorry, I'm going through here fast, so that's why I gave you the references so you could go do it. Because in general, I like to have my inputs, let me just show you that, but on a different line. And this kind of goes into a styling, but if I do input and hit tab here, this is your most basic type of tag, and it goes inside the form, which by the way, you can do this without the form tag itself. But best practices, what you will see, there's all these benefits you get from using the complete form, opening and just the form tag and wrapping your inputs in there. So if right now I went over and looked at my output, okay, refreshed it real quick. Let me make sure I have everything here. Good. Not sure. Oh, there it is. It's way up top. Like, where's that? That's your most basic type of input, right? You see this everywhere. So just by placing that input and telling it by default it's text, okay, that's what you get, which is awesome. And we're going to see different, like we could do number here, and you'll see different ways of doing that. So one of the things though, right, is if I just put, you don't have to do this yet. If I put, sorry, no, if I put input again, right? The next one will go and next to it. Now, there are times when you might want that. But for our purposes here, I kind of wanted them to be stacked. So that's why I went to chat and I asked, what's the best way to do it? And chat, of all the things it said, and I thought this would be good to use, is you can use block level elements. If you don't know about them, again, consider taking my 85 class. You can do line breaks with BRs. You can use CSS to do it. But you can also use this nice filled set. I like this, right? So what you can do here is inside your first tag inside the form is use filled set. So what you could do here is you could do filled set. That's nice. And now what you want to do here is I'm going to take this, I'm going to cut it, and I'm going to put it underneath here. Okay. Oh, now notice how it's not lined up. That's where, right, our tools make it easier. Now that looks better. Okay. So if I go look at it now, right? Let's see, what did I miss? Oh yeah, I'm not done with it. I was like, what did I miss, right? So filled set itself doesn't do the new line, but what it does do, it gives you some nice styling, which I think is cool. And by default, you don't have to do any CSS. You don't have to do anything else. That's all you have to do is just that. Now, the other thing you can do here and you want to do is put a legend. And a legend is basically just a wrapper, the text would be at the top around that outside. And I would say calculate, or I would just say carbon footprint, right? Or I might say input. You can decide what you want there. Okay. So that's nice. You get that just by default. I was actually thinking that came inside. Let me make sure real quick that I have this right. It's inside the filled set. Oh, that's why I didn't put it inside. Okay. So in order for, and we'll look what happens when you put it inside, then it actually places that content right in the form. Now, to kind of start seeing this a little easier, I'm also going to go over here. I'm going to comment these out for a minute, just so I can just focus on the form, because it's fun to do forms. I mean, honestly, I find forms, the more I learn about them, more and more fun. Okay, so let's do this. There's another thing about these fields, right? These input fields that we want to do, and it's something called a label. Okay, and we'll do that in here. Like every one of them will have a label. There's all this accessibility stuff you get from just doing that. But if I want them on another line, right, I can just use a div. So a div is a block level element. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to just drag it up into there, right? That's there. Do another div, drag this one up into here. Cool, right? So now what do I get by doing that is I get them on different lines, which is to me the way I want to see it, right? Now we could play with the styling a little more as well, but I think it's a good start. Now the other thing, and that's what I was talking about, and let me see, I think actually that should be tabbed over, but let me see what it does just to format that. Okay, I just munched it up. Okay, so in this case, what I would probably want to do myself, because I like it this way, is actually have this on a separate line. And you'll start to see why, because we're going to start inputting more content here. Okay. So in this case, we're going to add what's called a label. And a label is great because it adds some accessibility. Okay. Now the for is something you can read about in chat, because that was one of my questions about, you know, what does the for give you? Okay. And the label, and it talks about its accessibility, which is awesome. So you can either place it here, and it talks about what the for gives you, right? It's an attribute. So you can just see those. And it's just for now. Again, I don't want to complicate this too much. But let's say first name, colon. And let's come down here and do this. And actually, I could just grab this, copy this, okay, place it here. And this would be last name. Now, I probably could have waited because I'm going to add some other attributes, okay, here. But just doing this, right, I get a nice label. And when I click here, right, that was the actual idea, is that it should activate. It's supposed to activate that. Oh, actually, I guess it's if I wrap it in, meaning I could, let me do that, actually do this and put it after. I think if I do that, it's supposed to activate that. I have to play with it. You can have it either way. I'm going to put it back for a minute. Okay, so now we have labels. We have first name and last name. Now we know we're also going to want those other items from the actual input for the carbon footprint, right? The household members and the house size, those two we've done so far. But I just want to get you started understanding using these, because the other thing you're going to want to do here, there's a couple of things we're going to want to do here. And this, again, is just a start, is the first name and last name would be text. That would make sense. But we're also going to give it a name equals, and in this case, this will represent a variable that we can reference in JavaScript, which you'll see in a minute. And now you could do camel case here if you wanted, like this. But in this case, I'm just going to leave it like this. And you see this done. Matter of fact, let's go look at how chat did it. When it did, yeah, right? It didn't use camel case here. And I think there's some standards that would say we don't want to. And I'll show you how to reference this probably in the next video. So we're going to take that same thing for the last name. Okay. And in the same, now by the way, these are in the input itself. Okay, so then we do last name. Okay, so if we have first name and last name here, right? I still got to figure that one out. Anyway, now we have our first name and last name. We have our field set. And what's the other thing we would need for a standard form would be the submit button. Okay. And that was another question I asked about chat because I've seen it done various ways. But in this case, right, what you'd want to do is there's a couple, you could do button, okay, like that, just do a regular button. And then you could do type equal submit. And there's reasons, okay, let's actually go over here and look at when I was asking chat about the buttons themselves. Now, there's two ways to do it. Chat showed me input type. I personally like button, and the more I've read about this is one of those, like, chat may give you an answer that you may have other knowledge, but you may not, which is part of why people have a problem with ChatGPT, is that, right? So like this would be a question. Sorry, I don't want to jump around too much, but which is best, right? Input or button for submit on form. Well, actually, I don't even have to say on form because the context of which I'm talking about, right, are used. However, advantages, simple, right? So this is great. It's like, okay, there's some advantages. Older browsers, disadvantage, right? So there's disadvantage to doing it this way, right? Advantage, right? Rich text. Again, that's more of what I have seen, easier to style. Semantic meaning, which is a good thing because that means when screen readers are reading it, it gives a better button. Old browsers might be a little clunky, right? Summary. If you need something quick, you're not concerned about styling, do input. Otherwise, use button. I think button's better, so I like to use button. So what I'd want to do here, though, is also hit submit. Now when I do that, right? Oh yeah, so why is it here? It's because I put it outside of the field set. Now the question, yeah, right? Awesome. So if I made my page bigger, what would it do, right? And in this case, this is what we call a block level element because it has its own line. Awesome, right? So there's only a couple other things I want to do before we actually start integrating some of this into our code. One of them is if you hit submit, notice what happens up here in the URL where you hit submit. And that's because we're not handling the input yet, which we'll do in a minute in our JavaScript code. But also, there's some benefit to the form is that you can just come over here and on the input, put required. And you will be amazed, I think, if you've never done it, what this will do. These are attributes. Sorry, I should have said this all along. Okay. So what I've had is I have a field set. Sorry, I have form. I have a field set. I have a legend. Legend inside the field set. I have a div. Okay, for a container kind of inside that. This is what creates that line. So it creates it on a new line. Without the divs, they'd be lined up next to each other in a row. Okay. I have a label. I have an input type, text, first name. This is a variable name we'll see in a little bit, and it is required. And I have a submit button. And it's all wrapped, like I said, in a form. So by doing that, I'm going to get rid of this, and I recommend you do this. Okay. When I hit submit now, I get some. Now, this is where I'm going to have you put something in your notes. Just by using the required, you get built-in validation. Because imagine, right, your users are always, you assume users are going to do the wrong thing and not give you correct data, or, right, in this case, no data. They're just hitting the submit button and you're stopping it, and you're not writing any JavaScript code. All you've done is put an attribute there. So in your notes, right, in here, right, what does, in your own words, what does that required do? It does simple form validation. Okay, simple form validation. Now it's not the highest, it's like at minimum we do required. But we also handle it in other ways that you'll see later. But the reason that you get this functionality is because you've used the form here. Okay? Okay, so now that we have that, I'll go ahead and have you commit this. Make sure you have those notes on there, and then we'll continue with the next one.